We are live and we are talking about the ACC power rankings. Then we'll dive deeper into Clemson, their win over Wake Forest, and their upcoming home game against Virginia. Before I dive into all that, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video. I appreciate you joining live. I'll be checking the comments throughout. As if you've been on one of these before, you know I like to show a lot of comments. So be sure to share your opinions as we go through this. Did want to let you know I won't be live next week. I'll be won't be able to be on, and then of course the bye week. So this might be the last live show for a little bit, so definitely participate in this one. So let's get the rankings up there, and let's start breaking them down. Give me 1 second to pull this. All right, so here we have it. So the bottom of the power rankings, we have a new bottom feeder in NC State. NC State loses this week at home to Syracuse. That's back-to-back home losses now for them, with losing at home in Raleigh to Wake Forest, and then turning around and losing at home to Syracuse. I think Syracuse is pretty good, so I don't think that's the worst loss in the world. But it's just crazy to think before the season, imagine picking them to lose back-to-back home games to Wake and Syracuse, right? It would have been unthinkable. They're one of the two, easily one of the two biggest disappointments in the conference, them and Florida State. Florida State's the team above them. They had the week off, so just by virtue of not losing for once, they finally hop NC State. But those two teams, really, really disappointing. Florida State obviously was picked to win the conference, so more disappointing in that respect. But NC State was more than a dark horse candidate to win the ACC. Talk was about Florida State and then Miami, Clemson. And then there was a little bit of a drop-off, but not a huge one, to NC State. And the dark horses were more so like Louisville and Virginia Tech. So those were sort of the six teams that were thought to have like a real shot to win it. And as we'll see, as we talk about towards the end, two of those were right. And then there was a team that everyone forgot that actually has a very, very realistic chance to win the conference. So we'll talk about them in a bit. Let me advance this. Okay. Then this next group, Wake Forest, Stanford, and Cal. Wake Forest lost to Clemson. We'll obviously talk about that more at the end of this video when we dive deeper into Clemson. But I thought Wake's defense was abysmal. That's all the stats that coming in. And aside from those first two drives where they forced punts, that was the case. But even in those first two drives, that was all about Clemson. Cade Klubnik was missing throws. And I'll talk about that more when we get to Clemson. But I thought Wake's defense was really bad. Conversely, I thought their offense was pretty solid. They've got a really good running back, Damon Claiborne. They've got some good receivers. Donovan Green was out, and Clemson's cornerbacks, frankly, are better than their receivers. But I still felt that Wake had a good offense in general. They had some big plays. They moved the ball at times, especially early in the game. They were shut out in the second half. So I didn't think the team was all bad, but that's a bad defense, and it's a bottom four team in the ACC. At Stanford, they got blown out by Notre Dame. A lot of teams are going to get blown out by Notre Dame, but since they went to Syracuse and won that game, they've now lost 3 in a row by 24 plus points. So I don't know if they've regressed or if their performance at Syracuse was a fluke. It could just be that it's got to be one of the two. Their competitiveness against Clemson the first half in Death Valley feels a little fluky now. So I've dropped them just a hair. They were 12 last week. And then Cal had 14 last week. I've moved them up to 12. They keep losing, but at the same time, they were very competitive with Miami. They were very competitive with Pitt. So are they just a team that's going to be a tough out, but are always going to get out? Or are they going to start winning some of these? They've only lost to Pitt really because of this field goal. So more on Pitt when we get there, but that does kind of make me question Pitt a little bit. Yeah, so this is a great point by Kevin. They're very close to being undefeated in ACC play. At the same time, like, who have they beaten? Like, they had that win against Auburn that everyone thought was great, but turns out Auburn's no good. They're beating like UC Davis, so they haven't beat anyone. They're just close in all these losses. So I don't know about them. I'll admit I was a little too down on them before, but I'm still not super high on them, and that's why above them I have Duke, who had the week off, and then Virginia, who lost to Louisville. So we'll skip over Duke because they had the week off. Well, just real quick on Duke, they play Florida State next week. I think that's a really interesting game that will make a lot of movement. This is the part of the season now where I can't base it all just on what I think. It's got to be about the record too, and you're trying to blend those to some extent. They are power rankings, so it is heavily on how good you are, but I can't just ignore Florida State just loses almost every game, right? Except that one game they beat Cal, but they just keep losing. So I have to put them lower. But do I really think they're the 16th best team in the conference? If they played North Carolina or Wake Forest, I'd probably pick Florida State, especially at home. If they played Stanford, I think I might pick Florida State. So that's where this is getting tricky. And Duke and Florida State will help kind of set that course. Either one will probably move 3, maybe even 4 spots, depending on the outcome of that game. So it's a big mover game. Of course, for Duke, it's a big step towards bowl eligibility, which they're highly probable to get, so really bowl positioning. For Florida State, it's just pride because they're probably not making a bowl. Virginia, they lost to Louisville at home in front of a really bad-looking crowd, really empty crowd. Really disappointing, honestly, because they're having a decent year. But they were right there. They led. I don't have the time, but they seemed like they led as much as Louisville. It seemed like they were very even teams. So are they bad? I don't know. I think this is where you start getting to that kind of muddy middle of the ACC, where I don't think any of them are particularly good, but they're also not terrible. I think Virginia maybe has elevated out of terrible into that kind of murky middle of the conference. But I will say this, they're 4-2. They have wins over Boston College, not bad. Wake Forest, it was a close win, but it was a comeback on the road. We'll give them some credit. Coastal Carolina and Richmond. So not, world beaters. And then they have lost to Louisville and Maryland. So, okay, it's hard to know really a whole lot of anything on that. But here's what they have upcoming. 4 of their next 5 opponents are ranked. And then they end at Lane Stadium, where they don't historically win. So they go to Clemson, then they get North Carolina. That should be a win. That should be win number 5. Then they go to Pittsburgh, to Notre Dame. You would expect those to be losses, although they could steal one. Then they host SMU. I'm starting to believe in SMU. I think they look good. I watched them play Louisville, and I was impressed. I think their offensive line is taking a lot of strides. So I think that's a loss. And they go to Lane Stadium, where I think Virginia Tech's better than them. I think they're more talented than them. And they're at home, and they just tend to win that rivalry game more times than not. So a bowl is, even at 4-2, a bowl right now is maybe 50-50, right? So we'll see where they finish. They could be a team that drops a bit. Boston College and Virginia Tech had the week off, and they will play on Thursday, which is a pretty interesting game. And it'll kind of decide sort of like the kings of this murky middle of the conference. Then you go up. I think Georgia Tech and Syracuse are perhaps I guess I tend to have a high opinion of Virginia Tech. Maybe that's a residual of me being so wrong about them coming into the season and thinking they would be so good. But I think Georgia Tech is maybe a cut above, at least from Boston College down. I tend to be impressed with Georgia Tech. That impressive, although they won. They needed a late score to beat North Carolina. It was a 68-yard Jamal Haynes touchdown run to close out a victory. North Carolina, battles is tied with like 20 seconds to go when they give up this long run. And that's how Georgia Tech wins. So another win, that's great, but not the most impressive way to do it. And now they go to they go to Mercedes-Benz. So I guess it's kind of a home game. I would imagine it's probably going to be a lot of Notre Dame fans, but they're playing where the Falcons play against Notre Dame. I'm not a huge believer in Notre Dame, but I do think Notre Dame, obviously is a hair better than Louisville. I think they're maybe slightly more than that better than Georgia Tech. Syracuse, let's see. Yes. Good point before we move on from Virginia Tech. Good point by Kevin here. That I wouldn't call it a near victory. It's a loss to Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt beat Kentucky on Saturday, and obviously they were coming off the Alabama win. Vanderbilt, maybe they pulled their record. Vanderbilt may be a middle of the pack SEC team at this point. So that loss isn't looking so bad. Of course, Virginia Tech also lost to Rutgers, which is looking that bad. Yeah, Vanderbilt lost to Georgia State. They did lose to Missouri, which isn't that terrible, but they're 4-2 with wins over Alabama, road win at Kentucky. They have the win against Virginia Tech and a win at Alcorn State, but pretty bad to lose at Georgia State. Georgia State is not good. And then they had a close loss at Missouri, which is not awful, but so yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pound them too hard for losing to that Vanderbilt game. Definitely need to mention that loss isn't horrific anymore, but look, it's still Vanderbilt. It's not like Vanderbilt turned into LSU or something. And then there's Syracuse. Let me make sure before I say this. 1 second here. Pull this up. Yeah, they. Oh, yes. Sorry, I almost skipped over this. I'm glad I paused there. They went on the road and they beat NC State. I mentioned that before. They'll have an open date and then they'll play Pitt. And I think Syracuse and Pitt are pretty close. So that's gonna be a really interesting game. Pitt's got a tough schedule coming up. So we'll see if Pitt's really ready for it. So then you have Louisville, Pittsburgh, and here's where there's some movement and things get a little interesting. Sorry. Okay, so Louisville, they go on the road to Scott Stadium. They beat Virginia, but they look like dead even teams. They pull away or they score within the final 2 minutes to win the game. Great win, but well, I mean, it's great that they won, but a really good team would beat Virginia by more. We'll see if Clemson does that this coming weekend. So not the most impressive. Kind of like Georgia Tech, you got to win against a conference opponent, road, but like if you're that good, you're going to beat Virginia by more than a couple points. So I've been penalizing Pitt because I don't really believe in them. They're winning these close games, like they won close against Cal. They're eking out these wins. They had a fairly close one against North Carolina. Their non-conference wins, Cincinnati was really close. I think that's the one where they needed the disconcerting signals call for it to work. So look, if Pitt's not looking good, and I've been hesitant all year to move them up, well, Louisville's win, not that impressive. So it's 6-0. Pittsburgh makes the move to go above Louisville. And with that, Pittsburgh 6-0 for the first time since 1982. So good for them. Their schedule is going to really toughen up, though. Like I said, they've had those close kind of, really close wins over mediocre opponents, but they keep winning. But now they get the week off. Then they play that Thursday game against Syracuse, and they get SMU, and they have Virginia. Shortly thereafter that, they got Clemson. So they could finish 3-3 from here on out. I could see 2-4 from here on out. So they have 6 wins, but I don't think they hit 10. So that's why I'm not. I've got them. They're undefeated, and I have 2 teams with a loss above them. And up until this week, I had them below 2-loss Louisville, right? So that's a little bit of the inner workings there. Yeah, Kevin again. They look vulnerable. John saying their defense looks shaky. I don't know their defense looks shaky. I mean, Virginia didn't score a ton on them. They're just not super talented. I think Shuck is perfectly good, but I don't know that he's special. So yeah, I mean, they're okay. I'm not particularly concerned about them coming into Clemson and picking up a win. They've never beat Clemson, and they're not as good as I expected them to be. Let's say that. And I think Jeff Brom's a great offensive mind. So, what does that say about their talent level if this is all they're doing with that? So then you get into the top 3. SMU had off. So they're going to sit there and then in number 3, and then they're going to go to Stanford next weekend, where I expect them to pick up the win. And this is the team where I said they were not in those kind of 6 teams that people thought could viably win the conference. But it looks like they can, right? It definitely looks like they can. When you look at their upcoming schedule, I'll pull it up here. They could run the table, and that could set up some really, really interesting situations. So they go to Stanford, 8 p.m. ACC Network this Saturday. After that, they have Duke on the road, Pitt at home, which will be tough, Boston College at home, Virginia on the road, which could be tough, but if they're as good as we think, that should be a win, and Cal at home. Very possible they go 7-1, or winning, just dropping one of those. It's not unrealistic they could run the table. They could go 8-0 in their first year in the ACC, which is wild. But if Florida State is obviously way worse than expected, that was their first game, and then Louisville maybe a little bit worse than expected. They dodged Miami, they dodged Clemson, so things broke their way. Honestly, it would be kind of cool if they did it. I was not a fan of the expansion. I definitely did not want Cal, didn't really want Stanford, but SMU, gets into the Texas market. Pretty cool place. I've been there before. I've actually been to a game there. I'd like to see him do it. And that brings up an interesting question. So if SMU, Miami, and Clemson are all tied, they don't play each other. So depending on how the tiebreaker goes, let's say Clemson gets left out. They're 11-1 and they don't go. Is that a disaster? Let me know in the comments. Is that bad? Are you mad? Or are you actually savoring the situation where you don't have to go win a conference game to make the playoff? At 11-1, you're probably already in as an at-large. And you might get to host a home playoff game, which would be pretty cool. I mean, Clemson hosting Notre Dame, LSU, Tennessee, a team like that. Probably not a Penn State, but it could be a really solid, big-time opponent. I mean, it wouldn't be the Group of 5 champion; they'd be the 12th seed. So I think it's pretty cool. And conversely, if they win all those games, Clemson's undefeated in conference play. They go to the conference championship, and let's say I don't think it will happen, but let's say they lose bad to SMU or Miami, they probably get left out at that point. So no home game, no game at all, and they're in some bowl game, which if they win is whatever, because then the story is just Clemson was unfairly treated and all that. So let me know, do you care if Clemson wins a 3-way tiebreaker? Because I want to win the ACC, but I don't know how much I care. I think my perspective has been shifted a bit by last year's Clemson basketball team that laid an egg in against Boston College in that ACC tournament, and that actually propelled them to success in the tournament that people actually care about, the NCAA tournament. So in hindsight, I'm glad that Clemson basketball team lost to BC, because we wouldn't have this memorable Elite Eight, probably the greatest team in school history, the 2 best wins, Baylor and Arizona in school history for the basketball program, if not for that loss. So do you care if Clemson loses a tiebreaker and doesn't have to play in Charlotte and gets to go right to the playoff and host a home game instead of playing a neutral site game in Charlotte in the cold at night? I don't know. John here says, no way SMU can beat Miami or Clemson to me. Well, they don't play them is the thing. And so maybe SMU, Clemson, and Miami are all undefeated. SMU goes and they lose to, and Clemson is in the playoff along with Miami, who's the 3 or 4 seed, as the conference champion. I think that's a fine situation. And I don't know, man. I don't know that SMU can't beat Miami. I mean, Virginia Tech more or less beat Miami, and their call was overturned. But there was a time where Virginia Tech had just beat Miami until the replay refs or replay officials overturned it. So SMU is better than Virginia Tech, and SMU is way better than Cal. So yeah, I think they could. Yeah, but it's not the rankings here, Kevin, that determine it. It would be some combination of who they played, what are the records of the teams they played, and then it goes to analytics. So it's not really the playoff rankings, and the rankings we have now are AP anyway. And Clemson's schedule, Clemson's got Pitt, but who else do they have, right? So I don't know that Clemson's schedule is going to give a movement. They're just waiting on other teams to lose. You see, LSU was behind Clemson. They beat Ole Miss. That's better than anyone Clemson has. So Ole Miss falls behind Clemson. LSU jumps Clemson, as they should. And that's kind of how it goes. So then let's talk Miami. So they had the week off. Miami will go to Louisville. Great comment here. Great comment here by John. Miami is vulnerable against Louisville. We'll see. I mean, if Miami plays like they did against Virginia Tech and Cal, Louisville's better than those teams, so they'll lose. They're going to go on the road, much tougher environment. They were at home against Cal. They were at home both of those. So now they're going to go on the road. That's a tough stadium. I mean, it's not like the toughest in the world, but it's good. I've been there. It's a solid home field advantage. If they play like their defense and their turnovers, they can lose to Louisville. Now, I don't think they will. I think they'll snap into gear after this open date and they'll look awesome. But, wouldn't be the worst thing. So that'll be interesting. And Jay here is right. Clemson has the worst ACC opponents. SMU is pretty similar. Pitt and Louisville for them. Those are their big 2. We haven't played Pitt yet, but this will be our big 2. So pretty similar. But, yeah, I mean, Clemson is fortunate because Clemson, well, depending on your perspective, but in terms of the ease of going 8-0, Clemson's fortunate because NC State and Florida State those teams were supposed to be really good. They were on Clemson's schedule. It seemed like Clemson had a really tough schedule with them and Louisville. Well, NC State's awful. Florida State's awful. Louisville's good, but not as good as we thought. And Clemson, Dodgers, Miami, SMU, and Syracuse. So that's, one of the easier paths to 8-0. And then you look at SMU. They play Pitt. They play Louisville. They dodge Miami. They dodge Syracuse, and they dodge Clemson. So really, SMU and Clemson, extremely similar schedules in terms of what they dodge and their path. Miami is tougher. So let's talk Clemson. And I guess we'll transition. I'm keeping them number one. I thought their win was impressive. They had the 2 bad drives. They gave up the 1 touchdown. After that, they were lights out. So Clemson, I think, without a whole lot of doubt, deserves to be number one. So those are the ACC power rankings. Let me put them up on the screen one more time. So we go Clemson, Miami, SMU. That's kind of a tier. Pittsburgh, Louisville, and I guess you could say Syracuse and Georgia Tech. I think those 4 really is sort of a tier. And Virginia Tech, Boston College, and I'll even say Virginia and Duke for now is sort of a tier. And then you got that bottom group that's, I think, really bad. And we'll see. Florida State very well could beat Duke and kind of drag Duke back into that bottom tier. And I think Virginia very soon will be dragged into that bottom tier, and maybe Boston College too. But I think I like that top 8. I think it's a strong top 8. There's not an Ohio State or an Oregon or an Alabama or Georgia or Tennessee. Clemson can compare to perhaps a Tennessee or an LSU, but the top of the ACC is, not super elite. To have 2 really good teams and starts dropping off pretty quick after that. But the top 8 overall is solid. The bottom, the rest, not so good. So let's leave it there for the ACC power rankings. Let's dive deeper into Clemson's win. Over Wake Forest. So Clemson starts off really ugly. They're down 7-0. It's actually the first score of any sort they've allowed in the first quarter. The first time they trailed in any first quarter, if you think about it, it was 0-0 against Georgia. So it was, I don't want to say dicey, but it was rocky, perhaps. Not ideal, for sure. And really, it wasn't. I want to give credit to Wake. They did some good things on offense, some really tight window throws by Hank Bachmeier, and some really good runs by Damon Claiborne, who's a really, really good running back. So credit to them. I thought their defense was okay at the beginning, but really it wasn't about them, in my opinion. It was more about Clemson and Cade Klubnik kind of playing poorly. So he had 5 missed throws that I just counted in the first half. Most of those early, most of those in the either first 2 drives or at least the first quarter for the most part. But he had an overthrow and an underthrow to Stellato, the same to Briningstool, and then he had a 5th. I think it was an overthrow to TJ Moore. The overthrow to Troy Stellato was a wide open slant that maybe it definitely goes for 8 or 9, but I think maybe goes for like 20. And he just fired it way over his head. So he was really inaccurate early. But he settled in, and from that point, Clemson dominated. I thought that domination was apropos because this was Clemson and Wake Forest 73rd consecutive meeting. And most of those are Clemson getting resounding victories. Clemson's beat Wake more than any other ACC opponent. And now with the expansion of the conference, they won't be playing every year. So they will not play in 2025. It's going to break a really long streak of the 2 teams facing off. And perhaps, playing a lot doesn't make it like history in a meaningful, an interesting way. It's Wake Forest, but it's kind of weird. It was weird to me, and I disliked not having Georgia Tech on the schedule this year. I really wish Georgia Tech would have been a permanent rival. Frankly, I would have rather seen that than Florida State, but I have my Atlanta biases. Wake Forest probably didn't deserve to be one, but it is weird. It's really, really weird to not see them on future schedules. They'll start being something like every other year. So they don't play them next year. So it's just fitting that it was a clear majority. They said 60-40 on TV, and they never say stuff like that on TV. They said it was 60-40 Clemson fans in a legacy field in Winston-Salem. And by the end of the game, it was like 90-10 Clemson fans. It was a 49-14 win. Coach Sweeney has never lost to Wake Forest. The last time a Clemson coach lost to Wake Forest, Tommy Bowden was fired. So 16 in a row. That's a record for Clemson, and it's a record for either school in the head-to-head matchup. So, I'm not going to over celebrate or blow up exactly what happened, because I don't think Wake Forest is good. If you're watching the live stream, then you just watched the ACC power rankings where Wake was in the bottom couple teams. I don't think they're very good, particularly on defense. But once Cade Klubnik settled down, this offense became pretty much unstoppable. Bryant Westco was out, which was kind of a concern. I mean, not as much because of the opponent, but it was disappointing, and hopefully he's back soon, because I think he really opens up some of those deep, explosive plays, and they really weren't there in this game. I don't necessarily think it was just because he was out, because, TJ Moore is certainly capable of that. But this was more about surgically picking them apart. So the starters in the game, tight ends Briningstool, and the wide receiver starters were Stellato, Antonio Williams, and TJ Moore. And those four players, including the tight end, they had 23 receptions for 291 yards. They had no receptions over 30 yards. So not super explosive, but really, really efficient. Basically, they did in this game what they tried to do last year, where they weren't attacking deep, but they tried to be efficient. They couldn't do it last year. This year, they've been explosive. And in this game, they weren't super explosive, but they were very, very efficient. And so that's really the first time we've seen that this year. And we wanted to see the explosiveness, right? That's what we needed. But in a way, it's good to see that they can also score in different ways, right? If they take the deep ball away, we'll pick you apart. And after they picked him apart a while, that's when Phil Moffitt just went off. He kind of got gummed up early. And I wonder how much of that is their defense adjusting versus I think he gets better as the game goes on. I think Moffitt really needs a couple carries to really hit a stride. And then he looks amazing. He's lowering his shoulder, knocking guys over. Really, really physical runner. I love Moffitt. I know a lot of guys loved Shipley and thought he'd be a big loss when he was gone. I think Shipley is a good player, and this is not at all a criticism of him. But I think shifting some of his carries to Moffitt makes the running back room more productive, because I think Moffitt works better for this offense. Just love seeing Moffitt out there as much as he is. And then Jay Haynes is a good number 2 back. And I got to give some love to Keith Adams Jr. I thought Keith Adams Jr. was really good. I mean, limited carries, but he's really physical, just as much as Moffitt, maybe even more so. And I could see next year perhaps, him and Jay Haynes is kind of a thunder lightning duo, with him being more short yardage and Jay Haynes being a legitimate starting running back. And I'm not worried about that. I think that duo is actually okay. I was pretty concerned when those guys came in as recruits that they were lower stars, really because we kind of missed on other guys. But I like what I'm seeing from those two, and I think they could be offensive line stay strong. And it sounds like most of this offensive line will be back. So I like the future of this running back room too. And speaking of the running backs, Moffitt had a 22-yard run. That was as long. But the most exciting one was actually a 2-yard run. It was when Clemson went to the heavy package for the first time all year. And it was funny because Sweeney had been asked about the heavy package and said it was top secret. So I don't know if he planned it. I mean, it's really the situation just has to come up. But it did come up. And Capehart and Woods were the 2 defensive linemen who came in. So Capehart and Woods came in, and they were fantastic. They were excellent. Sorry, let me just close this out. There we go. Capehart so Woods goes to the outside, and I guess first is Capehart goes to the inside and sort of seals the edge, and then Moffitt runs around to the left. Guys coming from the outside to take him, and Peter Woods lays a perfect block, and Moffitt just runs perfectly between Peter Woods and DeMonte Capehart for the touchdown, untouched. I mean, it's perfect. It's exactly what you want on that package. And those 2 were awesome in it. So maybe we'll see that more. Then defensively, Peter Woods and DeMonte Capehart were also awesome. I thought they just dominated up front. I think Woods is finally looking healthy. I miss him being in the middle, but this was, in my opinion, his best game as defensive end. Claiborne, who I gave some credit to before, he looked good early, but they pretty quickly figured it out and shut him down. He ended up with only 2.9 yards per carry on the game overall. Taylor Marin, who is their leading receiver, or was at least coming in, I think still is, he was limited to 9 yards. So really elite play by Avion Terrell and Jane Lucas. I saw some people online saying that Jalen Lucas was struggling. I don't think so. I think Terrell's the star for sure, but I think Jalen Lucas is great. I think that's an incredible duo. And then on top of them, you have the safeties, Khalil Barnes and Kylon Griffin, each had an interception. So excellent play by those four. I will acknowledge that I don't know if they're reserves or nickels, but Koval and Shelton Lewis got picked on. I've noticed Lewis picked on in prior games, hadn't noticed it for Koval, but it was a couple times in this game, and we got to be fair and acknowledge that. The interception by Barnes was on a deflection where the throw was off, and the receiver hit off the receiver, and Barnes scooped it right before it hit the ground. But the receiver had beat Koval on that play. It was, I don't know if it was a slant or an in, but he was running across. And there was a window. The quarterback missed it, but there was a window because he had a step on Koval. So a little bit to clean up there, but this defense allowed 14 yards, right? So that's really impressive. So before we start looking, well, maybe this is looking ahead a little bit, but before we shift gears to Virginia, I do want to talk about Cade Klubnik. So he had 309 yards in this game. He's up to 1,528 yards. He has a really, really nice 17-2 touchdown to interception ratio. Really, really impressive there. And it's honestly, I know the schedule's weak, but that's good enough to get into the Heisman discussion at least a little bit. So let's start. Let's kind of kick that off a little bit briefly here. Cam Ward has 2,200 yards and deserves to be ahead of him. Fine. And then you got Dylan Gabriel for Oregon. He just beat Ohio State. Big time showcase kind of game. And Jalen Milroe for Alabama. I'm a fan of Milroe. They're going to play bigger, tougher opponents. Milroe beat Georgia. Gabriel beat Ohio State. Clemson, hopefully we'll be able to say they beat Pitt, right? Perhaps if Miami could run the table, maybe they'll play Miami, and that'll be kind of the Cam Ward versus Klubnik showcase. And then maybe Klubnik has a little bit more chance there. But, you're talking like three guys that I think are probably decisively ahead of him. After that, you got Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, but Colorado lost to K-State. They've got 2 losses. They'll probably pick up 2 more. They very seldom give it to a non-quarterback. As amazing as Travis Hunter is, he's probably the most outstanding player, but they seldom will give it to a player like that. It's certainly not one on an 8-4 team. I think Louisville in 2016 when they sort of fell apart at the end of the year, but they had a lot of hype early. That may be one of the worst teams to actually have a Heisman winner on it, but he was by far the most outstanding player. I mean, he was amazing. He carried them. So Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, I think Klubnik might have an advantage. Quinn Ewers is awesome, but he missed several games, so he only has 890 yards, 9 touchdowns only, compared to Klubnik with 17 touchdowns just because he's got more chance because he's been healthy. Carson Beck maybe is another who's ahead of him. He has 1,800 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5 picks, and he did beat Klubnik head-to-head. Klubnik looked pretty bad in that game. So perhaps you have Ward, Gabriel, Milroe, Beck, Klubnik. Maybe those are the top 5. But look, man, the fact that I'm even able to talk about this after what happened against Georgia this year, and then as bad as Klubnik was like last year, that's pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that. John said, a lot of the voters decide before the conference championship games, which is a huge shame, a huge, huge shame. I remember back when I think it was the year that Lamar Jackson won, like a lot of the votes were already submitted before the championship game, which is, I think totally wrong. You can't do that. But hey, look, Clemson is in the discussion, and I think that's awesome. That's a treat. So kudos to Klubnik for his progress. So Clemson's got looking ahead on the schedule as we just talked about. What meat is left. I think you're looking at the 2 toughest games in the ACC, and South Carolina's. They battled Alabama. Let's be fair. They've battled some teams here. They almost beat LSU. They almost beat Alabama. I don't think they're going to beat Clemson, but maybe they can almost beat Clemson. So they're probably, it's at home. Pitt's on the road, so maybe Pitt's a little tougher. But I'd say Pittsburgh and South Carolina are the toughest games left, followed by Louisville because that one is at home. And I think South Carolina could be a hair better than Louisville. I'm not sure. You could tell me why I'm being too kind to the Gamecocks in the comments. So Louisville, Pittsburgh, toughest ACC games left at least. Pitt 6-0 for the first time since 1982. But after their bye, they'll get Syracuse on a Thursday. maybe they win that. It's at home, but I don't know. I think they lose to SMU after that. I think they'll beat Virginia, but I'm not sure. I mean, it's on the road. It's in Scott Stadium. Louisville barely won there, so Pitt, Louisville are pretty close. And then they come to Clemson, so Pitt could really kind of hit a roadblock. Yeah, Kevin's being fair here. I think South Carolina's not bad. They might have 5 or 6 wins when they come to Clemson, but they've the SEC's tough, and they got a tougher draw. So playing LSU and Alabama in the same season is not the easiest. And then you have to go on the road to Clemson too. That's a really tough trio of games they got stuck with. So with that, let's talk about this upcoming weekend. Clemson will host the Virginia Cavaliers. They'll host Tony Elliott. And Virginia is 4-2. They just lost to Louisville, as we were saying. And they've improved. So let's give them some credit. They beat Richmond and they beat Wake Forest on the road. Again, Wake Forest is not great, but they were down. They made a comeback to win a road ACC game. So we'll give them a little credit there. They battled Maryland. They were, I think they were up at halftime. They didn't score in the second half. They lose that game 27-13. That's actually a home game against Maryland. So not the best loss in the world there. They beat Coastal Carolina. They beat Boston College. And then they lose this weekend at home to Louisville. I think they're an okay-ish team. If I look at some of their statistics, Anthony Calandria is their starting quarterback, and he's got 1,490 yards. Pretty good total there. He has 9 interceptions to 4 9 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. So obviously a pretty big disparity between him and Klubnik, who has 17 touchdowns to 2 picks. But he's a guy who can make things happen. He's averaging 7.7 yards per attempt to Klubnik's 8. Not half bad. 64% completion percentage. I think he's decent. I think their decision to go with him over Musket up to their ceiling a lot. And then their starting running back is former Clemson running back Kobe Pace. He's got 71 carries for 331 yards, 4.7 yards per carry. We saw him at Clemson. He's a solid running back. Xavier Brown is there, perhaps, I don't know, maybe more explosive. His stats certainly say he's more explosive. He only has 46 carries to Pace's 71, but he has 3 more yards, 7.3 yards per rushing attempt. So that duo will try to run the ball in Clemson. And Virginia's rushing offense is okay. They're 56th rushing, averaging 4.6 yards per rush attempt. That's 175 yards rushing per game. Really not great. They're a little bit better in passing, ranking 41st, averaging 260 yards passing per game. So that's pretty solid. Clemson's offense, you would, from watching, you would think Clemson's offense would be better than this. Clemson's offense, 25th in passing, 280 yards a game, 30th in rushing, 200 yards per game, 6 yards a carry though. So it's pretty efficient. Frankly, they've leaned pretty heavy on the pass, so the rushing is maybe a little understated. But the eye test doesn't really match up with that. The eye test is really impressive, and perhaps a lot of that is held down by that Georgia game. Even still, I mean, it is still 1/6 of all the contests that they've played. Flip it over to defense, and here's the interesting note. So Clemson's passing defense is only 56th. They've allowed 208 passing yards per game. I think we've kind of complained about that at times. The defense has been a lot of bend but don't break, especially in that Stanford game. So not nearly as dominant as they are at times and as they've been in the past. I think this is an opportunity to see, is that defense going to elevate? Is that defense going to elevate enough that they can win a playoff game if they have some home playoff game against a team like Tennessee, LSU, a good solid opponent, but maybe not like a Texas or a Georgia rematch, right? The defense will have to get better for them to do that. And I think the rushing defense, maybe more than anything, needs to get better. They're only 65th, which that's not good, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's not good. Now, I think a lot of that is because of the defensive ends. Peter Woods was out. I think that they thought they had something a little bit more ready than they do at defensive end. And I want to call out this comment here because it was a good one. Jaheim Lawson's arrived too. Yeah, is a pass rusher. Jaheim Lawson's pretty good at defensive end. He's risen up. I think he's their sort of number 3. You got TJ Parker. You got Peter Woods. You got very little depth after that. It's probably Jaheim Lawson's the next best guy. So that is a credit to Lawson, but also a commentary on the lack of depth at defensive end. There's probably somewhere where they should have taken a transfer. Although I will acknowledge, as critical as I've been at times of Clemson not taking transfers, hearing some of Dave Clawson's comments about how you have to overpay to bring in a transfer and it brings so much discord to the locker room, it's almost not worth it. I think that combined with Dabo's very positive attitude towards paying the players at a more traditional salary with media sharing, as I think is the right thing to do, makes me a lot more optimistic and a lot more understanding of his hesitance to use the portal. Now, could they find a reserve defensive end who they wouldn't have to overpay? Yeah, and they probably should have. But it definitely seems a lot more. We're getting a more clear picture now, right? Dabo sometimes made some strange comments at times that made it, at least for me, a little bit harder to be sympathetic. You know, he says, "Oh, the NIL, we have the name, image, and likeness of God," right? Like, I'm a pretty religious guy, but that's just a weird comment. You know, talking about our whole class is transfers. They're just transfers from high school. Like, what are you talking about, right? So some of the comments like that, I think, soured me. But hearing someone else kind of speak to the more specific challenges, Dave Clawson, that is, and then Dabo being so positive about the salary or media rights sharing kind of thing that's coming, has me optimistic and understanding. Let's see if there's any other. Yeah, until we show a better pass rush, I'll continue to be nervous with us facing gunslingers, and Calandri is a gunslinger, right? So if Clemson doesn't get home, they could move the ball. I think that's what Clemson's going to score their points, but kind of like the Wake Forest game, you knew Clemson would score, but was Wake going to score and make it close. In the beginning of the game, you thought they might, and then they very much didn't. So hopefully this game goes a lot like the Wake game, except, you know, even better start. And I will say, you know, Virginia should be better than Wake Forest. But let's not forget, they needed to come back to win by 1 at Wake Forest. So they're better than Wake, but are they way better than Wake? I don't think so. I think a similar outcome is very possible. So let's see a few final comments here. So Virginia's defense, I want to make sure we hit on this. The rush defense is actually quite good for 3.7 yards per carry. So they're going to make life tough on Maffa and the Clemson running game. I think Klubnik's legs can certainly help that, help the cause there. But in their pass defense, really, really poor. 111th nationally pass defense, giving up 260 yards per game. I think this one's going to be a lot like the Wake game where Klubnik picks him apart. If West goes back, let's hope that's not serious. You know, hopefully Tyler Brown can get healthy too. Maybe that's not till after the bye, but he hasn't played a ton. I think he's nursing some injuries. Really would love to get one or both back in this game. Let's see that explosiveness come back. But even if it doesn't, I think Clemson can pick them apart, and that'll eventually open up the running game for Klubnik, but more so for Maffa. And I think Clemson will pull away. I don't expect this one to be super close. It's a noon game ACC network, and I think it quickly proves that that's the network and time slot it deserves to be on, because I don't expect this one to be close. If it is, that's concerning. Clemson will usually go into a bye quite well. They sometimes will come out of a bye a little sloppy, but they'll go into a bye well. So I expect this one to go the Tigers' way. Yeah, just checking these comments before we wrap up. We keep expecting more blitzing like we got from Venables, but not so much from West. He doesn't value as much. Yeah, that's probably true. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know that I don't think it's that they don't blitz. I think it's that they don't get pressure on the quarterback from the defensive line without blitzing, and they just don't want to blitz every time. But I see Carter blitz and Woodaz blitz a reasonable amount. I don't think it's overly conservative or anything like that. Anyway, let's leave it there. Thanks for watching. And as always, go Tigers. If you enjoyed this video, please help this channel by liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Also, if you're a pet owner and you live in the upstate, check out our sponsor, Ready Vets. They offer immediate walk-in care when your pet can't wait. They're open 7 days a week till 10 p.m. They're owned by 2 Clemson grads. They're located in Taylor's, just 10 miles from the Woodruff Road shopping district.